Mighty Number 9 has finally emerged from its crowdfunded birthing pool, donned in the regal garb of the pedigree and legacy of the Mega Man franchise, which Capcom apparently left in a cupboard somewhere and forgot about. Few games have had quite as glorious a lineage to live up to, but undeterred by the headwinds of internet scrutiny, Mighty Number 9 has finally arrived to grace us with its presence. And behold, my fellow gamers, it is okay. Yeah, while I don't agree that this is the affront to the name of Mega Man that a lot of people are making it out to be, it definitely didn't live up to even my tempered expectations. It's not great, but it's not bad enough to upset me. Though, I've spent all week playing Dark Souls 2 for the first time, so maybe I've just built up a resistance to disappointment. So, blah blah blah, all the robots except for you are going haywire, so you need to go bust them up. Story has never been the strong point of the Mega Man series, no matter how much X4 through 8 tried to focus on it. The game doesn't bash you over the head quite as much as the later X games, but it still has quite a few story scenes. They're just kind of there, whatever, it's a Mega Man game, the story doesn't matter. When looking at a Mega Man game, I like to break it down nicely into 3 parts: the mechanics, the level design, and the boss design. And that works just as well here. I mean, it would be tedious to argue that Mighty Number 9 is anything but a Mega Man game. The mechanics are actually not bad. You can shoot, jump, and dash. The shooting works pretty much exactly the same as it always has, jumping is responsive, and it's pretty easy to get a sense of the jump arc. You can actually change directions while dashing, and you can use it as many times as you like while airborne, so it's easy to cover a lot of distance without touching the ground. You can't shoot while dashing though. In general, getting around is fluid and feels pretty good. After doing a certain amount of damage to enemies, they will become stunned and you can dash into them to finish them off. That's where things start to get a little sticky, because that means that in order to finish off an enemy, you have to touch them. I do think it's interesting to include a mechanic that forces you to consider your distance from an enemy while fighting them, whereas in Mega Man, the fact that your shot covered the whole screen meant that you only needed to line yourself up with an enemy vertically to shoot at it. Here you need to be conscious of your horizontal relation to the enemies as well. But while dashing through stunned enemies won't hurt you itself, it will if there's anything else in the path, be it shots or other enemies you didn't quite stun yet. Also, since scoring is based on how quickly you can dash into the enemy after stunning it, the game incentivizes you to dash in anticipation of an enemy being stunned. And unless you can remember how many shots each individual enemy type takes, you're pretty much forced to just fire like crazy while approaching the enemy and dash at them once you think they're stunned, often getting it wrong and dashing into an enemy that wasn't stunned yet. And taking damage while dashing stuns you longer and knocks you back farther than being damaged normally. Some enemies will grant power-ups when you defeat them that will last for a short time. These power-ups, specifically the red Power Boost one, make progressing through the levels much easier, but since they're timed, if you get caught up on an enemy or an obstacle, you can find yourself back in vanilla mode, which leads into one of my major problems with the game. The game itself gets harder the worse you do because of the way a lot of design choices were made. What I mean by that is, on top of taking damage, making mistakes can sabotage your ability to make a comeback from them. After you defeat each boss, rather than simply getting a weapon, you get the ability to change into a new form. That's a problem since instead of just cycling through the weapons themselves, you need to select the form and then activate the transformation, which is a lot more clunky and inconvenient than just cycling weapons. You can set 3 forms to be accessed with a single button press, but that requires you to know what you want ahead of time. And there isn't a lot of incentive to use the forms anyway. Other than a few situations to hit enemies that were out of reach of the standard shot, I never found myself really wanting to use them. As someone who prefers to just use the Mega Buster in Mega Man games, it doesn't bother me personally, but from a critical perspective, you can't ignore it as an oversight. The level design is not great. Like I said, the platforming is fine, but there kind of isn't very much of it. The game has a lot of just corridors filled with enemies, and for the most part, the enemy designs and their layouts are fine, but the game doesn't do much in the way of non-enemy obstacles, and what it does add in platforming is rarely interesting. The game has a very frustrating affinity for instant death traps, and I swear if I have to fall down a winding spike-filled corridor in a Mega Man game one more time, I'm going to strangle somebody. And there are more vertically scrolling sections than there should be, which is to say, more than 0. There is a very good reason vertical scrolling is bad in 2D platformers. and it's pretty much that. And if bullshit off-screen spike death weren't enough, the game docks your score when you die. How much? However much the game feels like. The scoring overall is pretty confusing. It goes up as you defeat enemies. You get bonus points if you dash through multiple enemies before hitting the ground, and the combo, I don't know, might affect it? Most of the points you get are from end-of-level bonuses though, so it's difficult to judge how well you're doing just by your in-level score. And, as well as getting you oh-so-precious points, defeating enemies will slowly charge an auxiliary heal you can activate manually, similar to an E-Tank from the Mega Man X games. But this can only be realistically used once in a level. To refill it, you need to traverse the level itself, so if you save it for a boss, which is the obvious thing to do, use it and then die anyway, it's gone. If you want it back, you have to start the level over. I didn't think it was possible, but they managed to make an auxiliary healing item even more obnoxious than Mega Man X's E-Tanks. And as players who are more skilled at the game will have an easier time filling the heal, which they likely won't even need, the mechanic just makes the game itself easier the better you are, and unfairly punishes players who aren't skilled yet. The boss design has always been my favorite aspect of Mega Man games to examine. This is something that kind of burned me when I went back to play a lot of earlier Mega Man games recently. At the end of the day, Mega Man 9's excellent boss design is more the exception than the rule, and Mighty No. 9 does not change that. For a lot of the bosses, they took an entirely different approach to their design, one that I don't think works well with this game's mechanics. But the few, or well, two, that actually are designed like Mega Man bosses are kind of alright. Many of the bosses have extremely scripted patterns where they will just move to a point in the room and then do an attack, and what exactly they are going to do can be determined just by where they are. And there is usually one response to each of these attacks that can be determined just by what attack it is. Rather than needing to judge the boss's attack against theirs and your position in the room, you just need to recognize the attack and react to it. It makes the fights feel very static and predetermined, and much like with normal enemies, you need to dash into the bosses while fighting them as well. Every time you take off about a fifth of their life bar, the boss will turn purple and then you need to dash into them, or they will begin to regenerate the damage. As a lot of the bosses spend long periods of time outside of your reach, this can get really frustrating. Sometimes I would avoid attacking altogether because I knew that the boss was going to be outside of my reach soon, and turning them purple would just amount to wasted effort as they regenerated the damage I had previously caused. And trying to dash into them quickly after being turned purple is frustrating because it can be incredibly hard to judge exactly when the boss is going to turn. It could have easily been marked on the life bar, but no. And bosses take way too many hits to begin with. It's flat out button mashing sometimes, which I really don't like. And each boss has their own unique annoying traits. Pyro's two main attacks are running at you and then jumping. And it can be very difficult to tell which he's going to do, and apparently if he grabs you in midair he can take off half your health. Cryo spends most of the fight outside of your reach, and if he hits you with his freezing projectiles, not only do you take damage, but you also miss a crucial opportunity to attack him, which is stupid. Dinah is basically unfightable without the sword weapon because you need it to destroy the bits she throws on the ground. Mick fills the screen with a lot more debris than he needs to get his point across. Show off. Battalion and Brandish are good bosses. Give yourselves a gold star, Comcept. You got 25% of the bosses right. Their attacks aren't restricted based on their position, and you need to be mindful of your position as you avoid their attacks. They feel like real Mega Man bosses and make good use of the game's mechanics by forcing you to think on your feet to avoid attacks. But then there's Avi, who will not shut up, and also spends the majority of the fight out of your reach, and his hits can knock you off the platform and force you to waste precious retaliation time trying to get back up. And Countershade, a dark and mysterious gunman, voiced by Steve Bloom. How unexpected. And he's also the worst offender in the boring scripted attack category. And then there's the last boss. I'd call it underwhelming, but again, I just played Dark Souls 2 for the first time, so in contrast, maybe it's not that underwhelming. The game looks like this. Honestly, I do like the art style, especially on the enemies, but the backgrounds are very boring and lacking in detail. And something pizza explosions. But the music in this game is very good. It would have been cool if I didn't need to go into the options and turn everything else down so I could actually hear it, but you know. God damn it, Comcept. So my score for Mighty Number 9 is a 2 out of 4. It's okay. When the platforming is actually there and isn't trolling you with spikes and death pits, it's pretty good. And my complaints about dashing into enemies aside, the mechanics are reasonably solid. But the bosses are not designed in such a way to make use of them, and there are a lot of frustrating design choices and an unfairly punishing difficulty. At the end of the day, all we really got out of this mess was a mediocre Mega Man game. But frankly, that's what most Mega Man games were anyway. It's a bit worse than X4, but nowhere near as bad as X5 through 7. What I'm saying is, Mega Man's record has always been pretty spotty. Mighty Number 9 doesn't really change anything as far as I'm concerned. Hey, thanks for watching. Why not subscribe? Don't answer that, it was rhetorical. I'll have more reviews done whenever they're done, so stay tuned.